welcome to this LinkedIn Live. It's Thursday, it's 4 o'clock. I'm Nadine Paris. Jenny?
Hi,
I'm Jenny Ling.
And I'm Nick Sheriff.
And Jan?
Yes, I'm Jan Dane. So I was compensating for Jenny not paying attention.
Okay.
I was paying attention. I was waiting for cues.
Well, there you are. I mean, it shows you, for everybody who is listening and watching us around the world, it shows you what a live is, because we'd planned for me to say hello first, and then Jenny, and then Jan, and then Nick.
Yeah.
And we got a bit muddled up. So apologies for that. Okay. So very warm welcome to everybody who is watching us today. And we said that we would be looking at a topic which is how to ensure well-being for life online. And the reason why we chose that topic is twofold. We hear a lot about Zoom fatigue, and we hear a lot about access and equality. Now, the purpose of our discussion today isn't to talk about those issues. The purpose is to be disruptive leaders and to look for how we can move forward. And at the end of this LinkedIn Live, we hope that we will have given you some little strategies, some little tips that you can take away and that you can try. Everybody agrees with me?
Yeah,
yes,
sure.
Yes, they say. Okay. So we've had a question sent to us by Nicolas Maurice. Now, we should declare that we know Nicolas very well because we were all working with Nicolas in Dubai. And Nicolas has sent us a question. So I apologize if I'm not looking at this screen because I've got another screen where the question is. Nicolas says, an article online mentioned the lines between work and home life are increasingly being blurred in this pandemic. What well-being implications are there for those who do not have the setup for a dedicated office space at home? She then on saying, this has become apparent for a lot of people I work with. Some of them sit on the bed to work or perch on the sofa in a basement apartment. Now, what would we respond to Nicolas?
And we'd probably say that you probably have every right, if you like, to join in this part of the conversation with your employer. It is your house. They are borrowing the space, albeit you using their technology and equipment. So there is a slight change in the dynamic. And that maybe the first thing would be to make sure the things like health and safety are met. You're in the right chair, the posture's correct, screen size is okay, and that you have some control over thinking about and managing that.
Yeah,
it's a good point actually, Nick, because I've actually thought myself of standing up and leading some meetings or doing some coaching session while standing up, and I've tried that, and it makes a huge difference. As an exec coach, I sometimes did walking coaching. So you take somebody to a park. I did that with a client of mine in Paris once. Well, more than once, but with this particular one, we did it once. And we went to a park and we did coaching as we were walking. So sometimes I do a coaching session and I'm walking in my place, and it's very different. And it certainly gives me an energy that I don't have when I'm sitting down.
I think there's a thing about being side to side as well in that way, and I don't quite know how you achieve that. Well, you can't really achieve that virtually because you're face to face, but going for a walk, you tend to be side to side with somebody, and that's a really positive way. It just sets things up really well. It's very well founded, and so yeah, I don't know quite how you achieve that in in a virtual situation, though.
But you don't. You just stand up. So instead of being sitting at your desk, you just stand up. And because I've got the AirPods Pro, so I'm advertising Apple here, I can walk about in my house, and I can still hear the person talking to me. And sometimes you don't have to see the person that you're talking to. And I was discussing that with another client actually, who said to me, I'm not going to be on the video because of my bandwidth. So I'm going to switch it off if you don't mind. So actually them not seeing me was not an issue, but I then made the decision, okay, so I'm going to be walking around. And that was very, very different.
Yeah. I think you have
Go on,
Jenny.
Sorry, I think that's more difficult to achieve. I think that's great on a one-to-one, but I think that a lot of what we're talking about are people in meetings where there may be 4 people, such as we've got, there may be 6, there may be however many more. And I think what Nick was saying about the health and safety, and they could be on their bed. I had a phone call yesterday sitting on the floor because it was the only place I could actually get my phone plugged in when I was actually talking to somebody. But I think that I used to work at the National College, and I was a home-based worker because I was regional, and their health and safety, as well as their technician, came to measure my study, and they measured how far the desk was from the wall, how far the chair was, how much sort of arm width I had, and this little room had to pass all those health and safety things. And I think that there's so many people out there who are actually working in unsafe, maybe too strong a word, but certainly environments that wouldn't pass health and safety, any kind of health and safety audits. So I think maybe what we're looking at today is how, given the current circumstances, can we help people to work from their bedroom if that's where they're working from, and what sort of tips can we give for people to stop this Zoom fatigue, backache because you're not sitting up properly, your back's not supported properly, all those things that you would do if you were in an office.
I'd
probably
go further and say you've got more freedom than you think. You know, you don't have to be in that bedroom, and you've got to try and work out how you exercise that freedom, and that might take a little bit of effort by moving your conferencing tool onto your mobile phone, learning how to use the mic properly, and as you said, Jenny, turn the camera off. But no one needs to know you're making a cup of tea, you're in the kitchen, you're walking in the garden. I mean, in some respects, you can get greater freedom through working at home. You just have to think about it maybe in more subtle ways. But it's your house. No one's telling you where to sit, and you shouldn't think that anybody is, because they're not.
Maybe some people don't have as many choices. I've cleared everybody out of here and said, you can't come back for an hour. But a lot of people don't have the luxury of having a choice. So there might just be one room that they have to use, and that room might not have the kettle to make a cup of tea. I think that we discussed this last week, didn't we, about how fortunate we all are because we've got the space to be able to do this. But I think that a lot of people from necessity are going to be in places that they would choose not to spend a lot of time.
I think you have to be smart. I think if you think you're in a room, I would say you can do better. There's outside, there's a mobile device, you could be in the garden, you can walk around, you could be in the loo. It really doesn't matter.
That terrifies me that I've got my camera on.
but I think it can look as bad as you want it to look, or you can turn this into quite an opportunity and a bit of optimism. I mean, as Nadine said, even in the best of times, there's value in maybe doing that one-to-one, going for a walk, trying it differently. I don't think anyone's going back to the office too quickly either. I think, we've all learned there are other ways of doing it now, and some of them are for our own benefit, but other ways work better.
So is it about habits? Because we're used to having habits very well established, or we go to work, we sit at that desk. Even in open environment, you can sit at a different desk depending on who is sitting where. And you still have habits. The cafeteria is there, the coffee is here, so you do the same coming and going all the time. Whereas when you're at home, who says you have to sit down? Who says you have to stand up? Who says you have to be where you are?
I think it's that I sort of am in agreement with Jenny and you in a sense. A degree of formality in your house keeps you sort of work sharp and you feel like you're going to work. But equally, you have to make sure that you turn the Teams conference off, call one of your friends who you'd have coffee with, and go and have a coffee in the kitchen on Teams and talk to them, and then stop that and go back to work in a more formal sense.
It's about having that structure, isn't it? And I think that quite often when we're working remotely, we end up overworking because we don't have, we don't have to go over there and get a cup of coffee. There's no defined lunchtime. What time does virtual meetings finish, particularly if you're working across different time zones? So I think it's about having that structure, isn't it? And allowing yourself to go and make a cup of tea and allowing yourself to, okay, it's 5 o'clock, I'm going to stop because actually I haven't even had 20 minutes off today. So I think it's about not being guilty, but actually being kind to yourself and giving yourself that freedom.
Don't you think it's also the role of the manager to explore how it's going in terms of the duty of care? And when you have, I was talking about it with a client today, actually. When you have your one-to-one, the questions are very different right now, and you need to check in on your staff, asking them how they are doing, and how they are doing not only physically and mentally, but also how are they coping with their environment. Don't you think that there is an opportunity here to ask different questions?
I think at the moment, yes, you should is the first answer, but it's a difficult conversation because do you realize that having your phone on Teams with a little headset on, making a cup of tea, talking to your boss, is that acceptable? Is that okay? Or because I wouldn't do it in work and I'd be in my office, that somehow I need to replicate it? So I don't know how honest people are ready to be with each other yet, because I think at the moment this feels like a big experiment and we haven't really worked out whether we're going to use it or go back to the office at the end of it.
But we've had to be honest, don't we? Because we've had to, I don't use a screen behind me. I just, this is the room where I am. So people have seen where we live. People are aware of our environment. We're not lying anymore. We're not pretending not to be where we are.
But I'm not in the kitchen. I'm sat here, relatively formal. Whilst it is my house, it's a fixed space behind me that my wife spent time orchestrating, so I don't embarrass the family for a second week.
But that's precisely your choice. Some people don't have the luxury of having somebody who is going to tidy up their environment. And does the environment really define who you are? Because does it? You see it on BBC every night. They're interviewing people, and actually their background I find fascinating.
I absolutely agree. I find it fascinating. You've got the sort of eccentricity of books and books and stacks of paper everywhere, and you've got the minimalists, and then you've got everybody in between. But it's quite interesting to see who has what sort of background, and it is difficult not to make judgments because is the academic with all the piles and papers, are you going to trust them more, their message more, because they've got lots of books and papers, or do you trust the minimalist more? Or I do think it's fascinating. It's a whole new sort of 21st century issue, really, isn't it?
I think if you thought there was a dress code for work, I probably think, and I'm guessing, people think there's some sort of codification about what's behind them and where they are. And there would be a difference if I was doing this and you could see me walking around the kitchen, having something to eat and making toast. So I don't know where the rules are yet.
But you wouldn't do that in the office, would you? You might have an informal conversation around the office, but in the coffee bar or whatever, there are different conversations. And if you're having a formal conversation, then you would be in a formal space, whatever that would be. But if the four of us, say, or two of us were having just a chat, we could move about more and be a little more informal. Doesn't it recognize what the conversation's about?
So it sounds to me like there are some rules, even if they're unspoken. This notion of formality and informality. And I don't know whether we all know how to play the game yet.
I think it's like anything. When you realize there's a structure and some rules, and you understand and accept those, then you can begin to break them. I don't mean throw them away. I mean you can begin to bend and adapt them. And we started this conversation with a question from Nicola, and one of the two examples she was saying was someone perching on the side of a bed or something, and then reclining on the sofa. So the implication there that there isn't much space. Well, that whoever that is needs to understand that. Yeah, it's at times when they're face to face with someone on a business call, they need to think about how they're coming across. So it's what's behind them, it's what they look like. But at other times, as Nick said, it's your house, it's your space that your employer seems to have grabbed. But you've got to you need to, I think, have the attitude and the confidence to say, well, actually, I'm going to take this business call not face to face. I'm going to get up and walk around, and then I'm going to have 10 minutes while I make a cup of tea. And then I'm going to sit back down and I don't know, with my legs up and my laptop perched somewhere between my chest and my legs whilst I type an email or something. And what you're doing there is kind of sort of acknowledging that there are rules of engagement and then adapting them to suit your own individual circumstances.
Doesn't it depend on relationships? We were talking about the line manager kind of checking up on you, and you were talking about speaking to the line manager maybe out for a walk. And I think that if you've got a line manager or the person that you're talking to who you've got a good relationship with, you could say, right, I'm just plugging in, I'm going for a walk up the woods. And 9 times out of 10, people would say that's great. But if you're in a relationship with your line manager, whoever it is, where there's a tricky one, then you really want to be on point. And I think that it would be much more difficult to say, well, actually, I'm going to take this as an informal call. And so I think that relationships go back to what Nadine was saying about keeping an eye on people, but also about the level of control you've got. Because a lot of people, I think, are still under the sort of awe of their bosses, whereby I've got to do this right, and I'm under a lot of pressure to do this right.
Well, there's a heightened responsibility, I think, that leaders have, bosses have at this time, and I think that needs to be recognised and understood and thought through. If the relationship thing, which is what I think Nadine mentioned a little while ago, or maybe Jenny, that is absolutely crucial. That's so how are you maintaining that? And if when you're face to face. Hitherto we've been able to pick up all those non-verbal communication things, just a look, a grimace, just body language. We can't do that to the same extent now. So so that therefore demands a clarity of the way that you communication, and maybe a more intentional approach with regard to checking in with your staff. And just maybe we talked last time about certain things bubbling to the surface. Well, well-being and checking in with the employees, I think, is something that really needs to bubble to the surface now. What was the statistic that we had in that report? It was it the World Economic Forum report that we had a statistic that there were 3 things, weren't there? There was the percentage of the workforce now working from home. There was the impact.
44%.
Yeah, there was the impact on productivity, which was, or leaders sort of estimated impact on productivity, which was huge, nearly 80%. And then the third aspect was the mental health and well-being challenges from working at home. Well, those things seem to be recognised at that sort of level. I'd like to think that the boss of the person who's sitting at home perched on the edge of their bed kind of is beginning to understand that they need to have the right sort of conversation to support that person and what they need to do. Yeah.
I mean,
but sorry, Nick.
Even in terms of forget the tech in the bits, remoteness, if you like, we can sort of call this as a term.
Yeah.
Has two big impacts. One is the controller loses control, and the learner or the subordinate person gains a lot of autonomy, whether they want it or not. That's a byproduct of this remote working. And I think Nadine's probably right. Bosses have got a little bit more to do here, but they need to learn to play the not in control game. And then now there's a responsibility on, the subordinates or the kids or whatever it is, the workforce, to realize they've got a bit more control. And with great power comes great responsibility. So, although you're in your house, you've been given the reins of something, even if it's by accident.
That's twice now, Nick, that you've brought out that positive element, that we've been talking about the challenges and you've flipped it twice now. And I think that's really a sign that we should be picking up on. And actually, this is a positive. This can be a positive time, but you've got to flip the way that you're looking at it. And I think what Nick's saying about having that control is, and it's going back to what Jan was saying last week, it's all in your head, isn't it? And a lot of what you can control are your thoughts and how you're going to approach that. So I'm going to try and keep my Mrs. Positivity hat on, or in due reference to you, Nick. So I think that's great, because it's very easy to moan, but it's actually much more difficult to flip things and look at them positively. So I think that's a really, really good piece of advice.
So if we go back to Nicola's question about somebody who doesn't have the setup for the dedicated office space at home, I said earlier on that I think it's really important that managers in their one-to-one meeting ask the question. But I think we need to go further than asking the question. It's, an employer has a duty of care, and how can they support their employees actually having a better setup at home? Because otherwise they feel very isolated. There are a lot of people out there at the moment who feel very lonely because they don't have the setup. It's pretty difficult. So it's not only about manager asking the question, it's also, well, what can they do to help, given that actually they are remote as well?
I think again, it's going back to, yes, the employer has a duty of care, but so do we as employees. If you're an employee, you've got to take some level of responsibility for your own well-being. And if it's not working, I know it's a difficult thing to talk to your employer about it, because you want to be seen to be coping and to be doing well. But I think there comes a time when you need to say, look, I'm stuck here. I'm stuck in my bedroom. It's not working for me. But go with a solution, not a question. So if it's not working for me, I'd like to be able to do 50% of my meetings walking around or walking outside. So it's actually, instead of just going and saying, I need help, this isn't working, is actually, I've got some solutions. So I think that the employees have a duty of care to themselves to speak up and come up with their own solutions.
But don't you think, it's a very good point, because when I was a head teacher, I always said to my staff, don't come with a problem, come with a solution. But not everybody is like that, right? And not everybody will have the courage, the confidence to come with a solution when they talk to their line manager on Zoom.
Or the creativity.
Yes.
Or the creativity, or the ingenuity.
I'm struggling with this a little bit at the moment. The difference for requesting to work from home, it's beholden therefore upon the requestee to come with a solution of how productivity is not going to be diminished. This is not the same case, is it? That position's been thrust upon you.
Yeah.
So I think maybe the relationship between the manager and the employee have to work together to find a solution.
Yeah.
I don't think either of them wanted it.
No.
And sadly, it's got to be around productivity. You know, at the end of the day, there's a salary for a particular output, and then there's some well-being that comes with that. It's not just all about well-being. You know, if you haven't got a space to work in, well, we could probably present a really good productivity argument of why, you know, you need some help with a better space to be more productive. So I think it requires a conversation. I don't think it's on the shoulders of either. But I think the moment it becomes about productivity, I think the manager has to have a good look at what is the new acceptable level of productivity and whether we're getting it or not, and how best to ensure the workforce feel comfortable delivering that in this new environment.
I think you're right, Nick, but I still don't think that takes away from the fact that you know, as a leader, you don't want everybody who's under your leadership to come to you with their problems necessarily. You want them to come with a problem, but with a view to working towards the solution. It doesn't have to be a solution as such. It can be a journey towards it, you know, and that can open the discussion. I'm just talking about being 100% dependent on the leader to come up with the solution. I don't think is the way things should be going. I think you're right. That dialogue.
You're right, because if it's about the redeployment of resources, they're your resources. They don't even know what resources you've got. I mean, I wrote something down today and I thought, I wonder how many managers have actually done an audit of what their staff have now got to play with to maybe sort of have a reasonable conversation about how much they give. And do you know what? Maybe you can go for a walk in the woods at a meeting. I mean, I'd rather have your brain at the meeting than have you worried about what your living room looks like.
But it goes back to the relationship, isn't it? It's how you share your vulnerability to your manager to say, I've not got that right. I mean, ultimately, it's about the relationship, the trust, the confidence. And that's not easy, you know, and in a time like this, people's relationships have changed a lot because people share more about what's happening at home and say, you know, this isn't working. You have more people now saying this isn't working, I need to do it differently than a few months ago, because it's, you know, home working, because we've tasted home working. We know how it's like now. You know, some organizations may say, actually, we're going to continue with that. I mean, I know of one organization, well, it's an international organization, and they've said to their people in Paris, you won't be back until at least April. Take your...
There's a difference between a leader and a manager.
Oh, yes.
You know, and if you're a manager, you need things to manage, and therefore you need to know what the things are. Yeah. But if you're a leader, the idea is being first. A leader means you're the first one to go. So you should be the one talking about your vulnerabilities and your problems, and then everyone comes in afterwards. It's because you're the leader.
Yeah, although you can have people leading change and leading things from within an organization. You don't have to be at the top, do you, to do that? You can
be a section leader, but I think if you're going to wear the title, come first.
The thing that I was prompted to think when the Dean was just talking through that was the whole sort of tumbling, if you like, or changing of place of the house of cards that is often associated with organizations and bosses and people who work for them, relationships. And you know, if you're someone who doesn't respond well or confidently to a situation where a technologically driven communication style is your only your main option, then you're going to feel a bit threatened. And so you know, when we're threatened, we don't perform as well as we do when we're not threatened. So all sorts of complicated issues, you know, there's a kind of a whole arena around the things we're talking, which affects relationships between people. And I don't think any of that sort of stuff is insurmountable. But if you don't recognise it, acknowledge it, then maybe there's a problem or problems building that hitherto wouldn't. Yeah.
But maybe bringing it sort of close to well-being, it almost feels like any comment could be really taken very personally. You know, your house, your stuff, your rooms.
Yeah.
It's going to take quite a sophisticated
conversation
certainly to make sure it's definitely not that.
It's going back to vulnerability again, though, isn't it? And we talked about this last time, and we talked about being a leader. It's quite difficult to show your vulnerability, although it's actually very often a really good thing to do, because others can then relate better to you when they see your vulnerability. And I think being a leader and showing vulnerability is quite a challenge. But I think that if you are an employee and you are in any way unsure or vulnerable, then it's very difficult to get those conversations going. And I think that you lose out on those informal contacts where that build that relationship, that you pass them in the corridor, you see them when they're making their coffee and stuff like that, and your relationship to them has been cut down to these sorts of sessions. And I think it makes the sort of almost the sort of socialization and the padding around that relationship has gone, and you're reduced to a much more focused sort of what do I mean, sort of tight relationship without the social padding, which makes that conversation possibly more difficult to have.
Yeah, I think it sharpens the need for leaders to understand this, because otherwise you've got an immediate threat to your productivity, haven't you? And your retention of staff. And then, you know, if things are going so badly with regard to you and your boss, you know, number one, your productivity drops off, and then number two, you look for somewhere else with a boss that you think might be more in tune with your way of working remotely. Both of those are bad news for the employer, be it company, be it school, be it whatever it is. And so the onus is on the leader to manage that whole situation.
But I think it does come back to those great words, vulnerability and trust. When you go to work, you don't come to work with your home life, your kids, your wife, in all of that. It never is on show. It's you in a suit or whatever you're wearing. Are you saying then a good leader would show their vulnerability? And one way they could do that was, I'd like to see their kids running around pulling at their shirt while we're trying to have a meeting. That would make me feel a lot better. Yeah. But even for a leader, they don't cut. This is so new, all this stuff. I think it's a degree of pioneering bravery we're sort of asking for people to sort of jump into here.
Yeah, I don't think we're suggesting that it's kind of a false situation that you kind of arrange for your dog to come in and leap on your desk when you're in a sort of conference call, and then use that as a demonstration of how things are sort of chaotic at home. It's not that. It's about being confident enough in your own, in yourself and your style and the way you do things to deal with things when they do happen. So your child does come in and say, "Daddy, I need you to do this now." I'm terribly sorry. I just need to attend to my door. That I think that's how I see this. Otherwise, it would appear false, wouldn't it? I mean, I think.
But it is false. That's what I'm saying.
It is false.
Yeah. You go to work without the baggage. Now the baggage is here, and we want baggage recognized. It makes you human. We share that baggage vulnerability. You could maybe argue that's not why I go to work. I haven't invited work into my life.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe authenticity might be a good word then. A good thing to aim for. Be authentic. This is my life.
Depends what authentic is and what it involves.
Yes.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
Well, we know what authentic means.
you still need to be in control and have those choices. I mean, if I was being really authentic here now, I would be sitting up in my study. Now, those of you who've seen what my study looks like know that's authentic, but then so's this. I'm sitting in my sitting room, which looks much better than my study. So I'm still authentic, but I'm making choices to make it look better.
Yeah, that's fine.
By kicking your family out.
Yeah, but you have a choice, Jenny, to make it look better, and some people don't, and
exactly,
we know that. What I want to say as well is we've come to realize the impact of the environment on productivity, because you go to work and the environment has been designed in such a way that it's supposed to make you work in a particular way, and it's supposed to enhance productivity, right?
Yeah.
And now what we are saying is you're at home and your environment, which is very different from the work environment that you've been used to, has to be doing the same thing. The impact needs to be the same. Actually, it's very, very different. So now we're at a point where we need to look at the home environment and how can that help you sustain that productivity and even do better. So it's the whole conversation about the influence of the environment on yourself and your productivity, which I find fascinating.
Don't
because
forget,
you're supposed to be, yes, Nick.
That's true. But how many households have got one person doing that? You know, at the height of lockdown, it was me, the two children in bedrooms in school, and the wife teaching. There wasn't a lot of other space in the house to go off and walk and do anything anyway.
Yes, but that's what I'm saying. The environment has changed a lot, and it's making us reassess the impact of the environment on productivity. Some people may argue, and there is a school of thought that argue, well, before COVID, you wanted to work from home. You were entitled to work from home, yet you decided you chose to come to work because you preferred that environment. But ultimately, it's how is this environment impacting on who you are as a worker or as a teacher or whatever? How is that impacting on how you're delivering what you're meant to do for your job and be at your best? And for some people, it's been really tough.
I think it does test leadership.
It does
more than in a sense. We're all, if you're not a leader, you're stuck with what you've got, and you make the absolute sort of best of it. I think leaders still have options, and there are different ways in which they can lead this group of people. At least to give them some direction, comfort in, don't worry that I can see you washing. That's the last thing I'm interested in. And to alleviate all those fears and those worries and that stress that you might have. It's interesting you say that. I mean, in where we work, I think our productivity has gone up, and we've talked to a lot of people about that. But I don't think that's true for everybody. What I have found is I don't need to be in the same room with somebody to have a meeting. In fact, meetings are half the time now. We're doing it like this, which I think is a lot better. I don't have to wait for the tea and biscuits to come round, and then we have a break, and then everybody comes back. So I quite like it to an extent.
Yeah.
I think that, I worked from home for years, going back over the last sort of decade or so. I was home based, and we had a remote team, and we kept that team together through weekly meetings. They were webinars. They weren't anything as sophisticated as this, but nothing. And yes, I would always argue that I'm more productive, when I'm in control of my time here, because there are no distractions in theory of the workplace. But there is still that relationship of face to face that I missed, and I think people are missing. Working from home, that isolation, that remoteness that we were talking about, and I think that we're learning to develop and build relationships in 2 dimensions. And I've got some little rectangles in front of me, and that represents all the being that you guys are. But we can still manage to have a certain sort of relationship. But can that replace going out for a meal and sitting around a table with a bottle of wine, or having a meeting around a table. And I still think that we're getting much better about it. It's a new situation, it's a developing situation, but I'd still rather be round a table face to face.
Let me tell you a little story. In another life, I used to play lots of computer games, these massively multiplayer online games. One called World of Warcraft, huge game. Played it with the same group of people for about 8 years. And within about year 5, there's no cameras, so it's all voice and typing. We said, I'll tell you what we should do. We should meet up. Well, we did try and meet up. Worst idea ever. There is something about the persona that people get used to, and then you give them another persona, and it's not necessarily the same person anymore.
Yeah, I think it's. I think there's a number of factors there, and I think one of the factors is your starting point, because our starting point has been a face-to-face. We got to know each other when we've met each other face-to-face. Nick, in your little story there, your starting point with your gaming chums was not face-to-face.
Yes,
and it's interesting. So we were able to go from face, and this must have real significance for business and education. In fact, anything. Well, maybe any social interaction. Because what I'm going to suggest, if you having met face to face, you can then go online. Almost,
you're building on it, aren't you?
Yeah. I'm wondering if, having started online, you can't then you obviously can, but it's much more difficult to then go face to face. I don't know if that's not based on anything at all other than a.
No, I'd agree with it. You've got Tuckman stages of team development, that norming, storming, performing,
all that stuff. Yeah.
But of course, the idea is you're thrown together, and it takes you a while to really learn about the person.
Yeah.
If you go straight in online, you probably make the case that it's very difficult to know the person.
Yes.
And imagine the impact for a new staff member in a big organization.
Yes.
How can you get the culture of the organization across? You've got to work hard to do that remotely. And what about a young person coming to school for the first time? How does their teacher really get to know them?
Well,
that must be really challenging.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely key, really. And I know that we've talked in the past about some data where kids have shown that the thing they don't want a flashy, all singing, all dancing online experience. What they want is their teacher. Warts and all. Not that teachers have warts, but you know what I mean. That's key. And then it's interesting. But if you then go to the other end of the spectrum, the business training or the sort of more sort of executive learning sort of thing, then I think there's a less of a dependence upon that close relationship with that other person, and so there's probably it probably makes for a more discerning online audience in a way.
I think for teams that are multicultural and spread all over the world, it's been easy for people to continue chatting on Zoom because that's what they've been used to. I agree with you, Nick, that for anybody that you've onboarded in an organization as a new person, and there will have been many people onboarded during COVID. Actually, it would be quite fascinating to do some research as to where the best practices are, because there will be some. And perhaps that might be a topic that we talk about in the future. How do you onboard online when you're not meeting people face to face? Because there is no right or wrong. We think that the past is right because face to face is right, but actually we're getting by, aren't we? We're managing to do things, and Nick, you're saying productivity has increased in your workplace. I know of some other organizations that have said exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But is it always about productivity? I mean, do we measure everything by productivity? Yes. I mean, of course, leaders would say yes, absolutely, Nadine, you do. but we talk about relationships, we talk about people, because ultimately at the moment many people are being tested. So if we were managers, and if we were approached, we're saying, well, let's make sure that people ask the right question and get the confidence, and to ask their manager and to share with them the conditions in which they're working at home, which doesn't necessarily promote high productivity. What question as managers would we ask to get a response where we can help? What sort of questions would we ask?
You get a sense that we're not all playing fair, and that what you've seen in various workplaces, them making it work, and then there's a productivity estimate based upon that environment. The question that we're not asking is, in that team that works remotely around the world, if they could get together for periods physically, would productivity go up? And the opposite's true. If your great, very productive physical workforce are now split up to the four winds, can you expect the same amount of productivity? Or do you now, as the leader or the manager, have to work harder to try and bring that in a sort of virtual form together?
And how do you address, Nick? How do you address lack of productivity? How do you go about that? Because again, I've had a lot of people telling me I struggle to have a difficult conversation around productivity face to face. So forget about the conversation on Zoom, dreading it.
But don't you think it's like when you're being chased by a bear? So the bear's chasing me and Jan. How fast do we have to run?
Just faster than the other one.
Exactly. And you get a feeling where the productivity in this environment has to be recalibrated. You can't get back to where you were in April. You've just got to be beating the people around you.
Isn't it about getting the systems and processes for this new world right, to enable productivity to get back on track in the future? So that if you're changing things really quickly just to keep productivity going, in the long term, that actually may be a negative thing, because we know ourselves from school backgrounds, is that if you're going to change the school, if you're going to go into improving the school, there's no point in just fiddling about the edges. You've actually got to deep dive and get some really substantial school improvement happening. The results is your product. You might be able to get decent results for a year, but actually if you get your systems and processes right, then you build that improvement in, which will knock on, rather than just looking for the outcome itself.
We've just had a comment. We've just had a comment from Nicola. Hi, Nicola. She said, interested in the thoughts around virtual onboarding.
Yes.
And we've had a comment from Chris McShane saying, this is exactly where education is. I'm talking a lot about teachers planning for freedom.
Yeah.
This is the long term will benefit home working. I've heard about the expression planning for freedom. I'm not sure.
Sounds like a David Hasselhoff song.
I don't know. I'm not sure what it. I'm not sure what that means. I can't see the whole. The whole comment.
It'd be good if Chris could give us a bit more.
Come back,
Yes.
Yeah.
Chris, if you want to give us a little bit more information about what you want us to discuss around planning for freedom. And Nicola, yes, we can talk for a long time about virtual onboarding. I've never onboarding staff distance learning when I was ahead, but I've certainly onboarded new clients virtually as an entrepreneur, and it's not been a problem.
I think what the big item where we've not really talked about is this notion of the repatriation of time and we've talked about place, but it's this notion of time. That there's this stuff that happened in the normal work hours, and then there's this space outside of that. And you wonder whether people would be willing for some flexibility to keep the same overall time, but have a little bit more control over that, so they could pop out, pick up the kids, take their dog for a walk, do other things. There is a, you know, back to the Richard Branson, when he used to say, well, take Wednesday afternoons off, go and do the thing you love, and actually overall productivity went up. It didn't go down. So there is something about, just because we've always done it like this, that we have to continue. I think the world is changing.
Yeah,
we just accelerated a little bit here.
Yeah, it's about being flexible. It's about being flexible and trusting. We're back to trust, aren't we?
And it's seeing it as an opportunity, not a threat.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
It is, absolutely. Yeah, it is a real challenge, isn't it? I know talking to some school leaders, that they've certainly in the early days of lockdown, first lockdown, felt really under pressure of time, because they just felt available 24/7. Felt available. Felt they needed to be available 24/7. Now, in between those times, there were moments when they, you know, there were downtime, and it seemed to me that again, it's the 6 inches thing. It's a sort of attitudinal thing. Those who embraced that as an opportunity seem to cope with it really well. Actually, I'm not sure it's sustainable long term, but
there's a scientific answer for that, and that's because they went back to being a novice. And novices don't make targeted decisions. They grab and grasp at anything, looking for the thing. When you become more of an expert, you know the cues that you really need to pick into. And I think you're quite right. I think at the start, they all became novices again. But very quickly, they filtered through the chaff, and they've probably got something now they're reasonably comfortable with. Probably not the end product, but they probably feel comfortable running it.
Yeah, it'd be good to know what those are.
But I think it would be fair to say that we salute, we fully acknowledge the job that head teachers and teachers are doing around the world.
Absolutely.
And as far we've been involved in the distance evaluation in the Middle East, and we've seen amazing practice of how people are shifting so quickly what they were doing. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And, congratulations to all of those people who taking a risk, changing habits, having to learn very quickly. And we've heard the story. I was on my phone 24/7. Parents could contact me. I would respond. I felt I had a sense of responsibility.
There's a lot of that. Yeah.
There's a lot of that, and I'm just so grateful to all of those teachers and head teachers around the world. I want to acknowledge that, doing a great job.
And I'm sure.
So also they were working in a new system in some ways, weren't they? Because I mean, the teachers, they were experienced at teaching and learning. I mean, that's our sort of whole raison d'etre. But then to transfer that teaching and learning into teaching and learning through a virtual environment is a huge leap. And I mean, certainly for somebody perhaps of my advanced years, using that technology was really challenging for me. I'm totally at ease with any other aspect of education, but to have to translate that into the technology was really challenging for me. And I accept that there will have been a lot of teachers out there who are brilliant teachers, but don't necessarily have had to acquire the expertise to enable them to help their students learn virtually, which is very different from being in a classroom.
I think
none of them. Yeah, sorry, Nick. Go.
I think it's testament to the education systems, the notion of the self-evaluation, being reflective. That came out in spades. People were quite happy to try something and then admit it didn't work and change. And they were able to do that very efficiently and very quickly. So I think, people might have taken a slightly longer period to get somewhere, but most people got there in the end. And I think I really feel for that BEd student that came out, do you know what I mean, in September, having done a 4-year teaching qualification and realised, okay, well, I'm not doing any more of that then.
Let's start again. Yeah, but it's still about teaching and learning though, isn't it? And I mean,
but I'm not sure anybody prepared any teacher or school leader for this.
Oh,
No, and we're all very aware of NPQH, and that doesn't really prepare you at all for what school leaders and teachers are facing. We know that, but when we were evaluating the schools, at no point did people, those very courageous leaders, at no point did they complain about their well-being. That wasn't even discussed. They were just doing the job that needed to be done, and it shows so much resilience.
Yeah, I think almost too much.
Yes,
the
24/7, the 24/7 thing. Yeah,
it's that teacher, and I'm sure there are other professions, nurses and others. The last people they look after are themselves. Very good at the well-being for parents, kids, and stuff like that. Maybe now there's a bit of breathing space. The next step is for them to look at the resilience of the workforce and try and do something to ensure that it's available for September for another round of whatever it is they're doing. I think most teachers would be very young, and if you came out the factory, as it were, and this is your first year in teaching, you've been in COVID, in lockdown, you've not seen your family, you probably need a little bit of help. I'd have thought that wouldn't be too much of a reach to say that.
Agree.
Do you think that we need to look at resilience, because what it meant to be resilient, 6 months ago is very different now, and people are actually more resilient because they've had to adapt very quickly. We're talking about agile leaders. We've had to measure agility, remember, in our evaluation. Do you think that resilience has changed, that it's a different form of resilience?
Yes, I think there's this stoical crisis management resilience, where it doesn't work, but you are at the chalk face, at the front line, and you can't admit to the parents and the kids it's not working, it's not what you want, and you plow on. They've come out of that now. And I think now the resilience bit is probably for them to now look very hard. What is it we are going to do? So many methods, hybrid, blended, remote, parts thereof. What is it we're going to hang our hat on now?
I think it's in some ways it's easier. Is it easier to be resilient when it's a world issue? There isn't an option to go to an easier or a different environment because we are stuck. And when you're stuck, with being stuck, there comes a sort of philosophy is, well, let's just get on and do the best we can within that, because there's no option. If you always think that there's an escape route or another option, it kind of, I think that sort of gnaws away a little at your resilience, whereas we're all stuck. So just, we have to get on with it.
We're surviving to thrive. Yeah.
If everyone is being resilient, are you being resilient? If everyone is doing the same as you,
does that make it resilient? Yeah. I think the qualities of resilience are still there, even if everybody else is doing it.
Yeah, I think resilient. I think the definition of resilience has remained the same. It's just the challenges to our resilience have completely changed. But whether we are resilient or not can still be measured in the same way. It's just I think one of the things that helps when to become resilient is an understanding of the thing that's threatening, and we're being threatened by things that we didn't even know existed as threats before,
and it's out of control, out of our control as well.
Yeah, I don't know. Nick's looking thoughtful there. I'm not sure he agrees with me.
No, I'm just thinking through. The blind obedience, which might be the opposite end. Is there something about being stubborn? Is that being resilient, or is resilience slightly more sophisticated? When you're the only one, because let's say in your department, you're the only one who's single, everybody else is married, all their problems are dealt with, and you're sat there on your own. I bet you probably feel slightly more resilient than they do, and it's harder for you, I think.
I don't think resilience is the same as stubbornness at all. I think stubbornness is clearly stubbornness.
No, I think,
Are you sure about that, Jan?
Yes. I think that's an entrenched position. I don't think there's anything about resilience that's entrenched. I think it's much more subtle than that.
I was wondering though whether if everyone's doing it in the country,
Yes.
is that an entrenched position, and therefore it's slightly different than resilience now? You know, because you look around and you get a lot of comfort from everybody else in the same boat as you.
Yeah, and that adds. I think you can have national resilience, can't you? I think we can be a resilient people.
I think you can have culture, a resilience, you know, defined by a culture. I think definitely.
Yes.
And resilience by, dare I say, gender, possibly by generation. I mean, it'd be great to do a study actually on resilience, and maybe on those words we've been speaking for an hour.
We have,
and on those words we could conclude that our next topic could be around resilience, because there is a lot to say here, and we've hardly said anything really.
Yeah.
We'll have to come back to Nick about whether you can be resilient if everybody around you is also resilient.
Yes. Yes.
Would we think that people are more resilient having been through COVID now?
So on that question, we will stop our LinkedIn Live for today. And thank you very much to everybody around the world who've listened to us. And thank you, Jenny, Jan, and Nick. And see you next week on the topic of resilience. We'll work out the title, but it will be around resilience. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Nadine.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks, you chaps. Bye-bye.